Finding the sounds in the south are so much different than the woods at home. It's pretty cool. I love it. Especially first thing in the morning when everything's coming to life. When everything's waking up. Oh, I forget the name of the river. Hold on a minute. Big major river right there, about 150 yards from me. I think my maps are working here. It's not saying the name of the river. You gotta be kidding me. Oh well. Huh. Why don't I remember the name of that river? Why is it not named on here? Is that the Tom Bigby? Is that it? I think. Anyway, here I am. Had to have a little afternoon nap. I was sucking ass after a late night, and then of course up at 5 o'clock this morning. And apparently there's another fella coming, a thermal scope equipment guy. He's coming tonight. Wants to meet me and do some stuff, make some videos or something. Probably won't be getting any sleep again. And then we gotta get up early in the morning again. I swear to God, my friends try to kill me every time I come down here. Now, who do we got? A lot of voices. A lot of voices. This looks like a pretty long one. I'm gonna dive right in. Maybe we'll see a hog. Apparently there's a great big huge gator in this pond behind me. We didn't see him last year. And this is the same place I fished, the small lake, pond lake. Same one we made a video, I made videos last year and we fished on last year. I'm sure we'll fish again this week. That was a fun day. I shot a big hog right there too one afternoon. Lots of hogs around here. Alright, enough ramble, let's get into it. This is titled Camping Alone, this email. My name is Joel. I had a couple of really unique experiences in my life. I'm now 35, but the first time I realized these things were real, I was just a kid. And I was out camping with my dad and his friends and some of the other kids. Myself and one of the other boys were sharing a tent, and the other person with me started shining his light around right near me when the sun went down. And suddenly, we saw this shadow of something right outside our tent. And at first we thought it was one of our dads trying to scare us, but we tried to ask them who it was and there was no response. The unusual thing about the outline was that it had a pointy head. We thought his dad was wearing a beanie or something. Wake up the next day and we ask our dads why they're outside our tent, and they have no idea what we're talking about. And we ask them where the hat is, and there's no hat. And it was the middle of summer, and no one had a beanie or anything that could make that shape. We even looked through Dad's stuff. It turns out my friend's dad, who was a farmer, had seen one of these creatures before, and he told us about it and what it looked like. That experience always sat in the back of my head even up until I was an adult, but I didn't know what to think about it. I'd done a lot of fishing in my early 20s, and where I grew up is a place in eastern Washington state called Walla Walla, and specifically the Blue Mountains, and that's where this all occurred. We've got a few from the Blue Mountains of Walla Walla, haven't we? Looking up and researching fishing and hiking spots, I started to stumble on the occasional Bigfoot story. And it turns out a famous researcher by the name of Paul Freeman had been in my area during most of the 80s and 90s and had a pretty sizable following in the Bigfoot community because he had been a forest ranger and ran into one and nearly spent his life searching for proof. I read a lot of the subject and about Paul and others because I thought it was interesting, but I thought, well, this is so rare, I may never get near one. A local newspaper reporter named Vance Orchard had written a book on the topic, and I read it all the way through. And one of the interesting things about reading this book was that it had listed all sorts of places I was well aware of and grew up near my entire life. So they were only a short drive away. I filed these into the back of my mind. I spent maybe 3 or 4 years going out into the Blue Mountains every chance I got. Now there is some federal land way out there called the Wenaha Tucannon Wilderness Area. And it has some prime elk hunting, and I had heard, but I hadn't been out there. The upper reaches of these mountains, especially a decade ago, were covered with snow most of the year, and this particular year was the summer of 2008. I drove up one day to see where the snow line was with a friend, and we had a deep snow, so we didn't get out to go very far. I wanted to go to this campground I heard of called Squaw Springs, then Skyline Campground now, and camp out a night or two. It was also mentioned in the books, and I'd been to the most of the other places in the book, so this is kind of the unexplored territory for me, but interesting nonetheless. I'd hiked everywhere I could and not seen anything in the last few years, so I expected this trip to be the same. I contacted the rangers about a week later, and it turns out the snow had melted pretty quickly, and now the pass was clear. But this time my friend couldn't go with me. No big deal, I was just going to go camp out for a night or two and go home. So I drove up to this campground about noon or so. It's August, a hot day, and my car has been having trouble overheating from time to time. I get out to look around, and I hear a kind of a growling noise, and I initially thought it was my car. A low, guttural, almost gurgling sound that happens for a few seconds, stops, and then I hear it again a minute or two later again. At first I thought it was my overheating car because of the regular intervals at which it was happening. The way it resonated almost sounded like a drain, and I've never heard anything like it before or since, and I've camped out at the same spot just last year. And trust me, it still creeps me out 11 years later. There was one other person who had gotten there before me, but this was an out-of-the-way spot, and I thought, well, there must be some explanation for the noise. I started setting up my tent for a while and got everything situated, and I had a mallet in my car to hammer down my tent poles, and I hear something behind me, like a large rock or something hit the ground, but I didn't see what it was. Now at this point I hear the growling noises again every few minutes, but also slaps like wood hitting wood. And this was really confusing. And Bigfooters call this wood knocking. But I had no idea at the time what it even was, or if it was a common noise. Something made until I started asking people, typo, and heard some similar stories about it related to Bigfoot. I'm still setting up my tent, and at one point, it almost sounded like this wood hitting wood noise was mimicking me smacking the tent posts into the ground. This was starting to get odd. So I go back to my car and grab my camcorder. Smartphones were not much of a thing in '08, and I hear something moving in the brush. So I think, this is it, whatever the F this thing is, and I'm going to get it on camera. I start recording, and I go toward where I hear some rustling. And all that was there was a deer. Whew, I thought. It was nothing. All in my mind. So I go back to the car and the noises are gone. So I decided maybe I should take a hike to a spot a mile or two away down the trail. So I hike for a ways and start seeing thin outlines of feet. And at this point I think my imagination is getting the best of me. I have no idea what to think or how to process this. Okay, hold on a minute. I hike for a ways and start seeing thin outlines of feet. I'm thinking you mean prints. I go over a few small hills and then I get to this point where there is a side of a grade and a narrow spot between two hills that go further down towards the Wenaha River and the lower part of the area. Well, lo and behold, on the side of this hill, in a clearing, in perfect mud, I see the biggest footprint I've ever seen in my life. I had about a foot and a half long. I had about a foot and a half long, 5 very clear toes, a heel, and I just sat there and stared at it, Look where I come from, look back down at it, just wondering what the hell I've come across. There were no claws to be found in this print, and more prints are coming up to this point and going down into the lower area. I feel a creature at some point had used this spot for getting down into the valley and back up to the high point I was at. So things start winding down. I hike a bit more, and I go back to camp. And the other people who were there have left, and I begin to get things settled in my tent. It's nice and cooler now. It feels good because it's been so hot. I start to settle in, and all of a sudden I hear the growling noises again. I ignore it. Maybe it'll go away. I keep hearing it every minute or two now. And now I start to think back, oh shit, my car has been off for hours now. And I feel paranoid. The noises keep going and going, and it's just past dark. It starts to sound closer. It sounds like whatever it is growling right at me. I've never been scared of hiking or camping in the woods, but this had me absolutely terrified. Finally, I can't take it anymore. I don't even collapse my tent. I get my flashlight and throw everything in the back of the car as fast as I can. I didn't even look back. And sometimes I wondered just how close this thing was from me. I went back into town, and I was so scared I started pacing back and forth down the main street and wall to wall to calm my nerves. And I ran into this girl I knew, and she even commented right away how visibly shaken I looked, and I didn't even know what to say to her. And that was the end of it. I'll never forget. Sorry. And that was the end of it. And I will forever wonder about that night. And that was the turning point when I knew these things were real. And I think about it every once in a while and wonder what these things are. And I have dreams about seeing one even all these years later. It haunts me. I live in Seattle now, but I still go back to visit my old favorite part of the woods in Walla Walla. I love the Blue Mountains. It feels like home to me despite the crazy thing that happened. But it is quite a mystery to me. I'll always go to my spots, but it's been 11 years, and nothing like that has happened again. I like that you're so bold about this because no one believes me when I tell this story. It just seems so far outside of their reality to them. You seem like a really stand-up guy. If you're ever in Seattle area, let me know and I'd like to buy you a beer and shake your hand sometime. The world is a lot wilder than I think people realize. And that sense of adventure really speaks to me. I don't think I'll ever stop just wanting to be out there in the middle of the woods, enjoying every minute of it. Thanks for reading my story, Joel. Hey man, thanks for sending that in. Welcome to the club. Welcome to the club. What a huge club. What a huge club it is, isn't it? Fairly remote here. We're as remote as it can get down here. I mean, you know, obviously when I think of remote, it's like frickin' remote, northern British Columbia or wherever. So this is what's called out in the sticks for sure where I am right now. I took a little Polaris side-by-side thing here. I don't know how many miles I am from camp, probably, I don't know, 5, maybe? Side note. What's this one? This is a pretty long one. Holy, real long one. Oh, maybe it's 2 emails. All right, let's go. Steam rose from it. Thanks for putting all this together. I had an experience years ago, and except for a very few people, 6 to be exact, I don't mention it much. But when I was young, I didn't want to be made fun of or thought too odd. I wanted to fit in. But now that I'm much older than 58, I don't give a crap what people think. And to hear your experiences brought it all back to me. And I remember it like it was last week, so here you go. All over this. Let her rip. I was 14 and living in Ogden, Utah. I was with a church group. We were playing games in a cabin close to the Snow Basin ski resort. It was early spring, so there was still some patchy snow on the ground. And we were in this cabin playing musical chairs. It was down to 2 players, Rick Patterson and me. The music stopped and Rick had won the game. And as he went to sit down, I pulled the chair out from under him. And I sat down. And he went to the floor. It was a good prank. Got a lot of good laughs. But he got up and started chasing me. I was pretty fast back then. But I needed to run. I needed room to run, so outside I went with him on my tail. I took off running down this groomed trail that was about 15 feet wide and left him in the dirt. He went back in and I stood there about 100 yards from the cabin. It was dark, a bit chilly, but a full moon lit my way. And as I stood there catching my breath, I got that hair-raising feeling I was not alone. I turned around, and there, 20 yards away, was something standing in the trail that wasn't there before. And I was staring at it, trying to wrap my mind around what I was seeing. It was big and broad shoulders, and I thought I could see arms or legs. So I was thinking maybe a tree or a bush in the trail. Then I noticed it was hairy. And with the moonlight, I could see steam was coming off the head and the shoulders. and then exhaled, and I saw that steam coming out of the face area. That's when I knew it was alive, and it scared the shit out of me. I took off running back to the cabin and looked over my shoulder to see if it was following me, but it was gone. My next thought was it was going to cut me off before I made it back, but it didn't. When I ran back into the cabin, I must have had the look of death in my face, and all the leaders came running over to see what was wrong. They said I was white as a ghost and looked terrified. They were right, but I never told them what I saw. I hadn't spoken of it to anyone for maybe 30 years. And I used to think, how does something that big sneak up and leave without ever being heard? And after spending many years in the hunting woods, I've seen the same thing with big elk and moose. And all I know is that he was too big to be a man, and it was not a bear. And I don't care if I ever seen one again. In fact, I'd rather not. And I'm even getting goosebumps talking about it this many years later. Well, anyway, that's my story. So share it if you want. Thanks again for getting this page started. Right on. There you go. Another member. Appreciate your time, man. Appreciate your share with us. Next, it was 9 to 11 feet tall. Hi, Steve. I hope you're doing well. I just want to thank you for the very entertaining personal touch you add to your videos and the offer to share others' experiences. Of course, I heard of Sasquatch, and Dad took me to see the Patterson film as a kid, but never really believed or even thought much about the subject until I had my encounter. It's usually the way it goes. It all happened back in the summer of '02, but I remember it like yesterday. One day while picking up my pay in the war room at Fort Indian Town Gap, I overheard news that my National Guard unit was about to get orders to deploy as part of Operation Enduring Freedom. At that time, I was a rifleman with COC 111th Infantry, 56th Stryker Brigade out of Kutztown, PA. I'd currently volunteered for state active duty as part of Operational Noble Eagle, guarding the Limerick Generating Station. I was carrying full combat load on that detail for almost a year when I asked to be relieved. And at the time, I wanted to deploy with my unit. You know, that whole band of brothers thing, plus the retirement points and veterans benefits increase if you're deployed in combat. I guess you have to be a grunt to get it, because my civilian friends thought I was out of my mind. A 42-year-old infantryman, and wanting to be sent to an area of hostile fire. Ha. Now that I look back, I guess I was a little nut. It was then when a friend offered to take me on a weekend camping trip to a little pay campsite along the banks of West Branch of the Susquehanna, just west of Williamsport, PA. It was meant to be a relaxing trip before I deployed, and while there, we would drink a few beers, look for Indian arrowheads in the nearby fields, and he was also going to give me a flint napping lesson. We soon got bored with the area and walked after only finding a few broken projectile points and some chippings. And there was an excellent flowing feeder stream emptying into the river just downstream called Big Run, and I wanted to explore it. I've been hunting arrowheads for many years and have found that almost every stream and spring in PA has a small Native American hunting camp at the head where the water just pops up out of the ground. It was scorching that day, and my friend got tired after a mile or so, and he wanted to turn back. I, however, was determined to find a camp and went on alone. I followed the stream for another mile or two. When eventually it got so thick with rhododendron, it became nearly impossible to follow. At that point, I started to hear the sound of a highway way off in the distance and found a crushed soda can in the stream. And from the can, I came to the conclusion that the head of the stream was somewhere on the other side of the highway and farther away than I was prepared to travel. At the bottom of the mountain, I remember seeing an old logging road that ran up the gorge to the left of the stream. I decided that would be the easiest and quickest way back down to the river. And after fighting my way through the thick undergrowth, I finally found the old logging road path that was about 200 yards to the left of the stream. As soon as I located the trail, I found a nice flat spot that had a push pile for making the road. So I decided to scratch around in a pile to see if I could find any traces of flint chips in the soil. I have discovered whole arrowheads in these topsoil piles in the past at other locations. And all I found in a pile that day was a few small northern ring-necked snakes. It was getting even hotter, and I was almost out of the water, so I decided to pack up my scratcher and head back down the mountain. And not 2 steps into my journey home, standing about 60 yards in front of me, was the most terrifying experience in my life. Honestly, I would like to think that I'm a reasonably brave man, but I was not prepared for this encounter at all. And being an experienced infantry soldier and an avid big game hunter, it takes a lot to rattle me. But what I saw standing in front of me shook me to my very core, and I instantly froze. A flood of thoughts went through my mind in a second. I wanted it to be a bear in the worst way, just like I've seen many times before, but it just wasn't a bear. And when I realized what it was, overwhelming fear hit me, and I felt like I was going to vomit. When it turned and started running toward the stream where I'd just come from, I couldn't believe the speed it achieved in such a short time. I could clearly see these 2 massive, muscular legs running because the deer had everything browsed off as high as they could reach. The legs alone had to be as tall as me, and I'm 5'6". So this thing was probably almost 6 feet just to the waist. Being a long-time bear hunter, I think this creature had to weigh anywhere from 800 to 1,200 pounds minimum, and stood approximately 9 to 11 feet tall. The legs were thick and muscular, and it reminded me of a hair-covered telephone poles. The hair appeared to be very dark brown or maybe black, and I'm thinking no more than 4 inches long. And it sounded like a bulldozer busting through the rhododendron, snapping branches as thick as my ankles. I remember thinking there's no way I can outrun this thing. And if it wanted to, it could easily catch me. Being unarmed at the time didn't help with the fear factor, and at that point, I knew if I survived that day, I would never venture into the woods unarmed again. And like I said before, a flood of overwhelming thoughts in seconds. I knew to get back to camp, I had to go toward where this thing was just standing a second before. I remember thinking the sounds I heard earlier that I thought were deer must have been this creature following me. When I made that left uphill to get out of the rhododendron, I must have inadvertently flanked it. My thoughts were this thing was stalking me, and that's when the almost 20 years of infantry training kicked in. You see, in an ambush situation, you always charge into the contact and never go any other direction, because that's where the real trap is. It sounds crazy, but at that point I just bolted in the direction of where I first saw it. No shit. To tell you the truth, I didn't know I didn't know that I could even run that fast. I never also looked back because I was in full panic mode, but I knew if I didn't slow down a little, I would eventually fall because it was rocky and downhill. And I remember thinking if I fell, I would inevitably be injured severely and in bigger trouble. And somehow I gained my composure and slowed myself down a little bit, but kept running for what felt like 3 miles until I came to the river. Funny, I never told my buddy that took me on the trip about it. I'm not even sure why I kept it to myself. Now that I think about it, I'm not sure if I got a look at his face at all, or if I did, I must have somehow blocked it out of my memory because I was so scared. I think I may have gone into a slight shock because I felt sick instantly. And I know it saw me first. As soon as I started heading down the logging path toward it, I heard it move, and I looked up. And at the same time, it turned to its right and took off like a bat out of hell. It busted through the rhododendron at amazing speed. What could have taken me 15 minutes to climb and weave through, it plowed through in seconds. I think the sound of the snapping branches made it even worse, knowing the power that it would take to snap those thick branches. I have had nightmares about this big guy, and in them its face looked more human than not, and the head was shaped kind of like a coconut, still in the outer shell. In the dreams, it's never aggressive, but it still scares the hell out of me with its enormous size. I know one thing. If I would have had a camera, I would never have had the time to take a picture, nor would I have tried. It was too close, and it all happened so fast. I hope I never see another. At least not that close. I've heard that they are supposed to smell bad, but I didn't smell anything out of the ordinary. The hair was not as long as I've heard in other reports either. Maybe by early summer the hair is shorter, I don't know. I have to get a feeling that perhaps the area is part of a migration route, but I have no idea where that idea even came from. Weird, I know. I think that's why I couldn't find Indian hunting camps along that stream. Maybe the Indians knew and stayed away. I know if I had a topo map of that quadrangle, I could pinpoint the exact location due to the terrain features, and even to this day, every time I go hunting or into the woods, it's in the back of my mind. And I swear to God this is 100% true to the best of my recollection. Jeff. Oh, and I believe you, Jeff. I believe you absolutely, my man. Welcome to the club. Again. See anything behind me yet? Any big gators sneaking up to grab me? I was just thinking about it earlier. I would not want to live with crocodiles, would you? Speaking of monsters, man, those things are ruthless sons of bitches. No, thank you. I'm sure these gators are harmless, but come on, I'm from Canada. When you know there's alligators behind you, you gotta look. Maybe I'll quietly sneak up here, or I'll sneak along the lake after this maybe and see what I can spot first. But how about that sighting? Another one, right? How would you like to be that guy that day? Here's another one. It's titled To the Point. So one night I took my little brother. Here's a big splash. So one night I took my little brother night fishing in an attempt to get him off his video game and get him to do something outside. Well, we began hearing footsteps and a grunt or two off in the woods. Now we live in Georgia. We're in a swampy area, so we figured that the steps were just hogs. So we decided to get into our tents. We were in two separate tents, and by the way, due to the space and comfort... Oh, sorry. We were in two separate tents, by the way, due to the space and comfort. And then all of a sudden I hear gunshots. Hence I rush out of my tent to see my little brother white as snow in the face with tears running down his face. And he said that it reached inside of his tent and dragged him halfway out. He was scared enough that he had slept in the tent with me. Sorry. He was scared enough that he slept in the tent with me for the rest of the night. When we woke up in the morning, our fishing stringer was gone, and we had a Yeti cooler which seemed to have been ripped open and tossed around or something throughout the night. And to this day, he refuses to go into the woods alone and without a weapon. No doubt. Endo email. Thanks for that share, man. East Arkansas. Hi Steve, I'm from East Arkansas and have lived here for most of my life. My story is from when I was about 6 to 8 years old, around that time frame, and it was the early 2000s. I was at my grandparents in Shirley, Arkansas for a couple of weeks to go to Greer's Ferry Lake and go cliff diving and ride the inner tube. It was the second night I was there along with my cousins, and we were sitting out on the deck looking at Sugarloaf Mountain, which is on Greer's Ferry Lake, BC. When the sun starts to set, it's just a very nice and relaxing place to be, but that's beside the point. After a while, my grandparents and all my cousins decided to go back in because it was almost dark, but not dark enough to where you couldn't see anything. In the front of their house, they have a considerable yard, very open, and have two large cattle pastures that belong to the neighbors directly across the way. And from the deck, you can see just about everything that's in both fields without a problem, even when it's getting dark. I looked down that way to see if any cows were walking around. I looked left of the neighbor's house, and there were two figures running upright on two legs, very fast there. I saw them start almost from the neighbor's house. Both looked way too big to be human and way too quick. Now let me stress to you, the pasture is huge. The one they're running in, I still have no clue if it even was what I think I saw. It took those things less than 5 seconds to be out of sight and out of the pasture. And also, there was a barbed wire fence that went above my head when I was around that age. There are thick brush and trees in the direction they're running to, and I saw both basically take one leg and step over it like it was just a crack on the sidewalk. It was many years ago, and I'm going to be 22 tomorrow. Jacob. Boom. Appreciate that, Jacob. I've been to Sugarloaf Mountain. There's a lot of sightings around that area. Probably always has been. Probably always will be. Next, it left me feeling isolated. First of all, I just want to thank you for coming out and talking about Sasquatch. You have nothing to gain and a lot to lose talking about this subject. And you're doing a lot of good helping people who have had Sasquatch experiences simply can't talk about it without social consequences. I live in Minnesota, and I'm 30 years old, and I've been hunting and fishing, camping, and recreating in the outdoors my whole life. My passion, though, is coyote hunting. I enjoyed the fact it gave me something to do in the dead of winter, and it helped farmers. And I mention this to help you understand that I'm a person who is quite comfortable being alone at night calling in predators. I've been doing it since I was a kid. I don't get creeped out by it, and I have made several solo hunting trips over the years in the wilderness of northern Minnesota. I never gave Sasquatch much of a thought. I saw all the typical Bigfoot stuff growing up, but never gave it much of an opinion either way. All I knew was I'd never seen one. But then in June of 2016, the sun's starting to creep around and look at me. I can probably get through this email. It's reflections, right? But then in June of 2016, I, along with my girlfriend and her family, went on a 6-day camping and ATV trip in the foothills state forest of northern Minnesota. Got there on a Friday, and it was a fairly busy weekend. But Sunday night, all the other groups of campers had gone home, leaving my group to be the only ones there. All the camping spots are along the forest road, and they were all empty by 4 p.m. Sunday. We planned to stay until Wednesday and get a few days of the trails all to ourselves. So Tuesday night we had a fire. The barred owls were hooting, crickets and frogs were singing, and about half the group had gone to bed, leaving me and 3 others still sitting there. When all of a sudden something vocalized about 100 yards into the woods, loud. Like louder than any wolf, coyote, fox, you name it. It was powerful, and unlike anything I've ever heard in my entire life. Very primate-like, but way bigger than me. It lasted for about 20 seconds straight, and when it stopped, everything was dead silent. No more owls, crickets, or frogs. Just nothing but dead air. My Australian cattle dog, who's a coyote decoy dog and not afraid of shit, crawled under my chair and laid down. Everyone's looking at me for answers while my mind is racing trying to figure out what I just heard. And all I could say is, I have no effing idea. And a wave of fear came over me, and not a normal fear. I'm talking primal fear. Like I just wanted to go into my tent and hide in my sleeping bag, and I did. I went to my tent, and that was it for me, for the night. Everyone followed suit after me, and we packed up and left the next day. So I went on the DNR website the next day, and I got a list of every known animal in Minnesota and started listening to an audio of their vocalizations, and it was coming up empty. Then I decided to go down the Sasquatch hole. I didn't want to, but I wasn't finding anything. I found a recording from 2003 in Northern California of an almost identical vocalization, and it was titled as a Bigfoot vocal. I've shown the vocalization to many people I trust, asking them what animals make that sound, and none of them know. They just say it sounds like an ape or something like that. It effed with me for a while, and I do go back in the woods still now. It effed with me for a while, and I do go back in the woods still, now that I know that these things are real. I've seen your videos for years, and when you posted that first Sasquatch video in April, it was quite a surprise. And they helped me come to grips with the whole thing. It's a hard thing to get through, coming to terms with something that isn't supposed to be real. and it's laughed at is indeed real. It makes you feel isolated and you have to bottle it in. Seeing these videos puts it into perspective, and knowing there are other hunters and outdoorsmen that experience these things lets me know that I'm not crazy or alone in this whole thing. So once again, thank you for everything. You are very welcome. And you know what? This place is nothing without you. This place is absolutely nothing without you and everybody like you. Just comes a time, right? You know, for all of those watching that know, just comes a time. Comes a time when it's enough of the BS, enough of being scared. Look everybody in the eye, tell them to ram it up their ass. And just flat out tell them, you really think I needed this kind of attention from you or anybody else? Really stupid? Right? Well, what that was, but I just saw something go ripping. There's a field over there. I got a camera. I guess I could swing out there. But just something just went ripping across. Not a deer, ripping across that meadow. I just saw it cutting through the trees. Unless it was a bird that flew across. Here's a bird. That must be the river there. I think it was one of those big, tall, white birds, maybe. But it just went zip through those trees and straight across. That is the big river, so, yeah. Anyway, that's why I jumped up. Now, you guys want to go for a walk? We'll slowly walk up this road. That's all the email sharing. For those who are curious. And yeah, I got a rifle with me in case I see some hogs. I'm going to slowly walk up the lake here and see what I get to see. I'll bring you guys with me. Hold on. All right, here we go.
Well, that's about it for the view of the pond, the lake. They call it a lake. Imagine things starts getting a little more lively in the evening. I'm gonna head her back. Probably won't be getting too much sleep tonight, but I think we're gonna be recording a lot of it, and I'll share it with everybody when I can. I'll be back tomorrow, I'd imagine. Share my story at howtohunt.com. Keep them coming.